Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of Sefer Iyov, the book of Job. We are about to read chapter 18, that is Perek Yud Ches. In the last two chapters, we heard Iyov's response to his friends, and the main theme of the last chapter 17 was really Iyov just in despair. Iyov crying that he lost his friends, crying that his friends now think of him as an evil, bad person who is suffering for his own misdeeds, crying for the fact that he's suffering despite the fact that he knows that he doesn't deserve the suffering. After his soul searching, he knew there was nothing within his life that he did that would deserve this, and therefore not understanding what's the point, what's the purpose of this, and not getting an answer from God as to what's the purpose and the point. Feeling hopeless and feeling like he was going to die without ever having any answers, without ever having any understanding, and without ever having any appreciation for the meaning of his suffering. To this, the next friend, the second one, Bildad Hashuchi, comes in with his second response. And if that's what we're going to read in chapter 18. And if it's going to sound even more cruel and even sharper and worse than his previous response, well, that's because it is. And Bildad is doubling down further. He is so convinced and so set on his simple-minded, him and his friends' simple-minded understanding of what justice is. And that if someone is suffering, they must have done something to deserve it. If someone is enjoying bounty, they must have done something to deserve that. Their simple understanding of how God runs the world, and their insistence that that's how it is, and therefore, because that's how it is, it must be that Iyov must be guilty. They're doubling down on it, because they just refuse to hear Iyov and refuse to recognize that the world is not that simple, and God's justice is just simply something we cannot understand and cannot fathom. So, Vayan Bildad Hashuchi Vayomar. So Bildad Hashuchi then replied as follows. Ad ono tisimun kinsei limilin. Now, I've said many times during this podcast so far as we studied the book of Iyov that translating Iyov is exceedingly difficult. Translating these words is very challenging. And that's why when we look at the commentaries, you'll find dramatically different understandings. But most of the time, I'm sticking to the classic commentaries and their translations of the words, although occasionally I'm drawing upon some of the more modern scholarship, which sometimes translates words differently. But here, this word, the word kinsei, the Mitzudos and the Ramban understand kinsei to be a form of the word kates, meaning an end, right? And so then the way we would translate this is Bildad being frustrated. He's now the one frustrated with Iyov. So how long will you force us, right, to have an end to our words, right? In other words, until now we've held back our speech because we have to wait till you finish speaking, Iyov. So I don't know, how long will you make us wait for you to finish speaking? Tavinu v'achar nidaber, that you make it that we have to understand, and then afterwards and listen and understand what you're saying, and then afterwards we speak. Madua, now verse 3, Madua nachshavnu kavehema. Why is it that you consider us like we're like animals, we're dumb, like you're not even paying attention to the wisdom that we're teaching you. We're telling you that you're suffering because you did sin, and if you repent, God will make it better, right? So stop, listen to us, and you'll get out of this, right? Nitminu be'enechem. We are as if we are stopped up. Nitminu here is from the word atimut, according to Mitzudos, and you're treating us as if we're dumb, we're stupid, we're stopped up with from having any wisdom in our heads. Why do you consider us that way? Toref nafsho ba'apo. You are a person who is being toref nafsho, you are tearing apart your soul. It literally means he is tearing apart his soul in his anger. Now, it's interesting because Bildad and the friends are interpreting Eov's rants, so to speak, as if Eov is angry at God, which they're completely misunderstanding what Eov is saying. Because as we read through the words of Eov is saddened, is in despair, is despondent. But anger isn't really Eov's. There are outbursts, of course, but it's anger that he doesn't understand. Why am I in a world which I can't understand? Why do I live through suffering that makes no sense to me? He's asking God why. But Bildad is interpreting that as if he's angry at God. Angry at God for punishing him. Eov is more angry at God for punishing him in a way that doesn't make sense. What Eov is asking God for is understanding. Not so much, of course he wants God to stop the suffering, but more than that, he wants God to explain to him why he has the suffering at all. But here he's saying, Toref nafsho, you are the one who is, in other words, he who is tearing apart his soul in his anger. You're that one. Because of you and your rants and speeches, so to speak, right? Should the world abandon its ways, right? Meaning, that's the way the world works is with the simple kind of justice that I believe it works, right? Should rocks be pulled out of their place? In other words, because you're angry, nature should change. Nature is nature. And the way Bildad understands it is how does nature work? Verse 5, Gam or rishaim yidach, right? The the light of the wicked people, in other words, the light, the success that they had, yidach becomes crushed. It becomes low. It doesn't work. Velo yigash viv isho, the flame, the flicker of his fire, right? Doesn't get noga, doesn't shine. Lo yiga is from the root of noga. It doesn't shine. It doesn't glow. His light doesn't go anywhere. Or choshach bi'ahlo, lightness becomes dark within his tent of the evil person. V'neiro alav yidach. Again, the same word yidach here, where it gets weak. It sinks away. His flame, the flame of the rasha of the evil person goes away. This is Bildad's understanding of justice. That's how it works. Evil people aren't successful. Evil people's, their light goes away. Evil people don't get anywhere. So why do you expect, because of your anger, Eov, that God would change the way of nature? Think to yourself when you read this, who has a more realistic understanding of nature, Eov or Bildad? To me, the answer is obvious, but you can think that on your own. Yetzru tzadei ono. This is Bildad going to go on, and for pretty much the rest of the chapter, he's going to go on talking about how evil people suffer. And soon, it's going to become more and more obvious that Eov is the evil person that he's referring to, who is going through the suffering, obviously, because of his evil ways. Yetzru tzadei ono. The way we translate this is, ono is his strength, right? So his strong, and tzadei are footsteps. So Yetziru, according to the traditional commentaries here, means become a tsar, from the language of tsar, which means small and abbreviated. So Yetziru tzadei ono means his strong steps, those strong steps that the arrogant evil person takes, have become abbreviated, have become shortened, have become made small. Vatashlichehu atzaso, and his wisdom, his ideas, his plans have been thrown over, as through the translation, overthrow him. In other words, all those ideas that this rasha, this evil person has, those ideas themselves are his downfall. Kishulach bereshet beraglov. Why? Because he with his own feet leads him to get and send him towards the traps, right? You get the image of an animal whose feet is carrying it straight into the trap. V'al sivacha yishalach. And sivacha here is, again, I'm in verse 8 right now, is like a woven net of the trap. So he goes, that's his way, his path leads him over the trap. Yochez be'akev pach. This pach here is referring to like a trap, like the kind of trap that snaps like when an animal steps in a place, the trap snaps upon the animal's leg and grasps it in place. So Yochez Ba'akev Pach, the trap snaps up and grabs upon his heel. Yachazek Olav Tzamim. Tzamim here is understood by Mitzudos and the Ramban to be referring language of thirst. So then Tzamim here would mean his thirst gets strong upon him because he's in traps, he becomes thirsty and it becomes strong upon him. Tamun ba'aretz chavlo. This is verse 10. The rope is hidden in the ground beneath him. Again, this is the image of when someone hides a trap. The rope and the mechanism of the trap is hidden under the ground. So the evil person, walks thinking that he's great, but the rope that's about to nab him and grab him is hidden under the ground and it's ready to pounce. Umalkud to alei nasiv. And the trap, the malkud to is language of lachad, lamed chaf dalid, is a trap, right? Is alei nasiv, is upon the path upon which he's walking. So the path of evil is a trap. Saviv bi asuhu balahos. This is verse 11, right? All around him, balahos, terrors, are making him afraid. So he walks and pretends that he's confident, but he's really afraid of everything that's waiting around the corner to take him down. And there's, of course, a lot of truth to this. When someone is evil and bad to people around him and things around him, wherever he goes, he might pretend he's confident, but there's always somebody around the corner who's angry at him, who's upset with him, and wants to harm him. If one gets to the path of success, and I put success in quotation marks, by stepping on others and by doing evil, then they're always afraid one day someone's going to come and get them. And it sends his feet flying. In other words, it makes him run. The fear that all of a sudden, the littlest thing, and he runs. Yehi ra'ev ono. I'm at verse 12 now, right? And ono here is referring to his progeny, right? Those that come from him. His progeny, his family becomes hungry. In other words, once the punishments start, once he's in that trap, once that trap comes to get him, once his evil ways have caught up with him, then his family will be hungry. Ve'ein nachon litzal o, and there is nothing good. I'm sorry, ve'ed. I didn't read that correctly. Ve'ed nachon litzal o, and what is waiting for his tzela. Tzela is a reference back to the story of Adam and Eve, of Adam and Chava, that his wife was the tzela, was made out of the rib of Adam. So his wife is now is what's prepared for her is aid, is terror, and awful things. So which is contradictory, of course, to what the Torah teaches us. Famous in Deuteronomy and Devarim Chav Daled, Pasuk Tes Zayin, where it says Lo Yumtzu Avos Abanim, right? Children and parents don't get punished for the acts of their parents. But here he's saying that the children are dying because the person was evil, and this is clearly a direct jab against Eov, who we know his suffering began with the punishment and the death of his children. Yochal Badei Oro. This is a very difficult verse to translate, but so here what I'm going to translate, the Mitzudos understands Badei Oro here, meaning the things that the things that grow out of his flesh. So Badei Oro are then the branches of his flesh, which then means his children, right? They will get eaten. In other words, they will be destroyed by evil, right? Yochal Badov. Who will eat them? What will be the one that evils? Bechor Mavet. And Bechor Mavet is understood by the traditional commentaries to be the prince of death, or the king of death, which is the ultimate angel of death. So is going to come after his children. Yinatek me ahalo mivtacho, right? That which he was so confident in, his mivtacho, in his own greatness, in his own wonder, in his own success, will be torn out of his tent, right? That what will cause him to be torn out of his home and to lose his home which again happened to Eov, right? That which he was so confident in, that itself is what pulls him out of his tent. Vatatzideu lemelach balahot. And over here, and his fears make him run to the king. Now here, I'm going to venture a little bit away from most of the commentaries here. Most of the commentaries understand this Lamelech differently, but what I'm going to say is his fears send him to run to the king. All of a sudden now, with everything falling apart, that's when he finally turns Lamelech to the true king, to God. This reminds me, what made me understand this verse this way is there's no atheist in a foxhole, which is obviously a famous saying. At the point where everything is falling apart, that's when he all of a sudden turns to the king. When it's too late, it's over. He lost everything already, and it's not going to help him anymore. Tishkon bi ahalo miblilo. This is verse 15. So God, right, is within his tent now rests desolation, right? Without him, he's no longer in there. Yizore al novehu gafris, and upon his nave, which means his property, the land, his estate where he used to live, is now being pounded with gafris, with sulfur. This is the image of the gafris vamelach, which fell upon Sodom and Amorah, Sodom and Gomorrah. Right, the destruction is what is now in place of the place that used to be his estate. Mitachat, below him, shorashav yivashu, his roots have dried out. Umimal, and above him, yimal kitziro, his branches have become withered and dried out. Zichro avad mini aretz, his memory is lost from the land, and nobody cares about him. Once he's gone, nobody's mentioning him, nobody's building monuments to him. Velo shemlo, and there's no more reputation, there's no more monument, there's no museum al pnei chutz, all the way on the outside, in other words, among society. Nobody's making a museum for his memory and putting up statues and so on. He's just gone and forgotten. Yedfuhu me'or el choshech, right? He's been pushed. He became pushed from light, when he was at his height, to darkness. Umitevel Yiniduhu, and from the entire existence, from the entire universe, he's been excommunicated. He's been driven away. He's been thrown away. Lo ninlo, he has no descendant, no v'lo neched biamo, no great grandchild, no grandchild. Within his nation, he has no descendants. Ve'ein sarid b'mugurav, there's nothing left at the place where he used to live. You go to his estate where he used to live and he used to have his family. It's all gone. It's completely done. Al yomo nashamu achronim. The people later, when they talk about him, right, they'll just be nashamu. I see the translation being used, appalled. I think that's a good translation. They're just in wonder, but in just an awful kind of way. V'kadmonim achazu sa'ar, and their sa'ar is like from the language of a storm, or just an awful, terrible storm. The early ones that knew him, that were alive when he was alive, they're just, when they see the amount of destruction he has suffered, they're just completely torn apart by it. This Bildad has been going on and on and on, describing the sufferings of the wicked, and he's went into almost describing the fate of Eov himself. That's just how cruel he's being with this speech here. Just how deeply he is accusing Eov of evil and accusing him of being responsible for all the suffering, when we know very well that Eov, God called Eov a perfect, righteous person. But Bildad has decided, because of his simplistic mind, has decided that Eov is responsible for all this suffering. And just think how many times you've spoken to self-righteous people who think this way. Maybe not quite this dramatic, but have that same mode of thought. This is the final verse, 21 of the chapter. Mishkenos avol. However, this what I just described, this is what happens to a person who is wicked, who is bad, right? This is what happens at the end to such people. These are the places where they live. This is what happens to the places, not just physical places, but the metaphorical places where they were. this is the result. V'zeh mekom lo yada el. This is the place where the one who does not know God ends up. So Bildad had a very dramatic description of what happens to an evil person. This is how he responded to Eov. And in the next chapter 19, we're going to hear Eov's response to Bildad, which is going to be quite appointed as well, but obviously in a very different direction. Thank you so much for studying chapter 18 together with me. Looking forward to studying chapter 19, the rest of this book. I hope you have a wonderful day.